Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast. Right, welcome to another episode of the Waiting List podcast, where I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts, the recently rock-loving Jacqueline and the garden patio-loving Lung Lung. Today, we welcome a watch collector, friend, and those of you based in the East Coast in the US may know him already. He's James Jen from Beyond the Dial. So really happy to have you here, James. Welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
James.
Hi.
Thank you.
When did I like rocks?
I don't know. I must have been like when I actually set this this podcast, and then you started posting like rocks and
big
like,
rocks,
boulders, yeah. And I thought, oh, you obviously the season's gone, and now you're into rocks.
Wait, when did I post rocks?
It must be a subconscious love you have for rocks, then.
Okay, maybe.
No, I remember seeing this. It was on your story.
Okay.
Oh, you must have seen. Yeah, you must have felt the same thing as me then when you saw it.
Then it's just subconscious to me then, because I don't remember taking photos of rocks.
Sorry, you seem very insulted by the fact. So I'll change the next time to back to leaf loving instead.
No, it's cool. Okay, I didn't know that about myself.
Right. Sorry. So James, do you mind giving us some background to our audience that, because they might not know who you are, and just gives them some context?
Yeah. So, what do you want to know? I guess is my question.
Maybe the fact that you're Chinese, but you don't actually live in China, where you're born, where you were raised.
Sure.
Yeah. Where you're based, maybe?
Yeah. So I'm like a second generation person. I would consider myself. My parents came to the United States when I was about 1 year old. And so I came shortly thereafter. My father came for an electrical engineering master's degree. So he came in under the visa system at that time. Both my parents are from Taiwan. So I think a lot of people were coming over at that time because, the immigration system had changed in the United States. So people were immigrating with special skills or for higher education purposes, especially in scientific and technical fields where visas were available. So my father was part of that generation. My mother had started a small business in Taiwan where she exported lapel pins primarily to United States customers that were made in Taiwan. So she followed my dad. My dad got his green card because of his job in electrical engineering. And then, I came as a baby. Then my brother was born here. He's 8 years younger than me. We were both doctors. I'm a vascular surgeon. My brother's a gastroenterology fellow who's graduating this year. And so I grew up here in the States. I've lived in the New York area almost my entire life, except for 4 years of college in New Jersey, and 2 years I spent living in Philadelphia shortly after I got married.
That's great. That's a very good, that's one of the best intros we've had.
Yeah. Very straight to the point.
Yeah, actually very clear and concise.
Yeah.
Concise.
Clearly. I want to go back in time a little bit. So to when you immigrated to the US, what was it like growing up in that period of US? Can you remember much of it? Because that would have been a time where, like you said, a lot of people from a lot of, not just from where you were coming to the US for a lot of opportunity. So what was it like? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, some things I can remember from my personal recollections, and some things are sort of what my parents have told me as well. Like when we first came to the United States, we lived in Flushing, Queens, which is the biggest Chinatown out of 3 Chinatowns in New York. At that time, there wasn't that many Chinese people. So actually, I have a friend who's a family friend. And the reason they met and became friends is because my parents saw another Chinese couple with a kid in McDonald's, because like all the, only the kids want to go to get hamburgers at McDonald's, right? So they saw another Chinese couple, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're Chinese! Great, let's be friends. Our kids should be friends." So it was like that at that time. Now if you go to Flushing, it's 9 out of 10 people on the street are Chinese. So it's a very different, very much larger population now. But at that time, I think of myself as being sort of like the early days of immigration. The immigration law itself didn't change until 1965. And I think at that time, certain parts of the Chinese world were like developing, like Taiwan was developing, and took some time for people to catch up, the next generation to grow up, and then want to get their degrees and come to the United States. So I think we were sort of in like that wave of like, people from Taiwan coming at that time, sort of like educated, people with like scientific people. I think you'll find a lot of people sort of in that position. But I think growing up, it wasn't like I knew a lot of Chinese people. Like we moved to the suburbs to Long Island when I was a small kid. So, we only lived in Flushing for about a year. So when I was growing up, in my class, there was maybe 3 or 4 other Asian kids. There wasn't a lot of Asian kids that I grew up with at that time. And it was actually harder to connect with other Asian people than it is today, I think, because you feel like a little bit isolated or feel different because there wasn't, a community, like an online community that you could turn to. That like if you want to meet other Asian kids, you got to go to Flushing, or it's hard to find other Asians to hang out with when you're living in a mostly white community.
Actually, I have a question. How old were you when you realized that, okay, I'm Chinese and say they are white? Like, what was that age for you?
It's kind of hard to remember.
Okay.
I guess like, I always had a certain awareness of it. Like even in early elementary school, like, first grade or second grade, I think one of the things that made me feel different was that like my mother worked extremely hard. She's a businesswoman. She worked extremely hard her whole life and her long hours and everything. So she didn't have time to shop for clothes. So my clothes, and actually her own clothes, were actually bought in Taiwan and shipped to the United States. And so I wore clothes that had like Asian characters on them, like Hello Kitty, like Hello Kitty associated. She has like a character that's like Frog or something, like her friend the Frog.
Yeah.
So I had these like characters that like nobody ever seen.
Yeah.
And other kids are like, "What is that? What are you wearing?"
You were setting the trend.
At that nowadays, I think that would be considered cool, but back in 1985, 86, nobody cared.
Yeah.
They're like, "You're weird. What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
Oh, when I was a small kid, I do remember when I was in maybe kindergarten or even before, there was like other kids would come up to me, and I honestly didn't understand what it was. They make this like rhyme. It was like they'd like slant their eyes and be like Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these, like pull their shirt out.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what that meant because I didn't know it was in reference to me specifically because I didn't have awareness of myself as being different from the other kids.
Yeah.
I just was a little, I guess, confused by it at that time. I didn't know why they would say that.
Yeah.
And then like
that's
as an elementary school kid, I don't know. I guess those are probably the main things.
Yeah.
I ask this because I went to an international school and there were just very little Chinese people. Everyone was white. We had some Indian people. And I think I had epiphany when I was like 20, 21, that I realized I was studying in the UK, right? And I was walking on the streets, and then I realized that I struggled making eye contact with white people. And I never used to have that problem. Like I'll be very comfortable. Like I never saw color. Everyone was the same, right? And then I was thinking about this and I was thinking, okay, maybe sometime between 14 and 21, I started to develop these like, I don't even know what to call them, like defense mechanisms and ways of like protecting myself. So I started getting more comfortable with Chinese people. But generally, it's exactly like what you said. Growing up, you don't even realize you're Chinese. And I remember I was in an art class. This is when I was maybe 12, so old enough to understand stuff, but still never saw color, right? Never couldn't tell the difference. And then this white girl came up to me and took a piece of paper and put it next to my face and was like, "Your face is this flat." And then I remember going home thinking,
wow,
what? It's different, but it looks the same to me. Like, because in my head, it's just, we all look the same. It's just, okay, you have bigger eyes, I have small eyes, and da, da, da. I never thought about it.
Oh
So then
God.
I think about the people I've dated. Yeah. And it went from white guys to mixed, and then eventually I was just comfortable with Chinese guys. And it's not like now if I meet a white person, I feel intimidated or I feel uncomfortable. Like I still feel extremely comfortable. In fact, I think I connect with people who are more westernized. But it was just I've always found it really interesting when you make that transition from being like, okay, I recognize color and I see a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, for you, Long, did you go to international school like since you were really, really young?
Yeah, like so
Okay.
right after kindergarten all the way.
Okay. So for
Yeah.
me, I was born and raised in China, and then I moved to Vancouver when I was 11. So at the
Mm-hmm.
end of elementary school, didn't know a word of English.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like, so I grew up in China, right? So like all my classmates were Chinese. And then when I first moved to Vancouver, I had to learn English. And then in my elementary school class, I remember just like not being under, like not knowing anything. And then during recess one day, this kid came up to me and like started like pushing me on my back and like pushing me
Mm-hmm.
forward. And I was like, okay, like, but I can't communicate. And then now thinking about it, uh, he led me to another Chinese person. And then he was like, I think what he meant was like, oh, you can speak to this person because I think you guys speak the same language. So then I made
Oh.
friends with like Chinese people because I didn't know how to speak the
Mm-hmm.
language. And then my mom later forced me to move to an all a more like a Caucasian heavy school in downtown, and that's how I picked up the language. But I remember that memory so clearly, like uh, alone, having no friends, and not knowing a word of what they're saying, and then this person like pushing me forward and like introducing me to another Chinese person, um, uh, gesturing like, "Oh, you can talk to this person because you guys clearly look the same and speak the same language." And that person
Yeah.
turned out to be an like CBC as well, so they're Mandarin, like they
Mm.
didn't speak Mandarin, so that I was just so confused. But yeah, that was my experience.
Actually, when you said about the bit where you're in McDonald's, right? And your parents saw another Chinese person and they connected, and it was so similar to basically it just resonated with certain times when in my childhood. And actually, when I was had the pleasure of speaking to you last week, I noticed that there are very clear similarities between how your experiences in particular, but very different in some ways, because just in the simple fact you were in a very different country that was going through a different period. Because the UK, it really highlighted the difference between the UK and the US. Again, Chinese people during the time my parents went were few and far between. My mother, she went when she was 15. And again, a bit like Jacqueline, didn't know really much English at all. And she told me back then my grandfather had just opened his first Chinese takeaway restaurant, and how, groups of white people, you wouldn't even call them gangs, just because there weren't any like affiliation to your culture or whatever, would just come into the store and give my grandfather a lot of shit, right? And then they were constantly fighting to the point
Sucks.
where my grandfather, he would step out the store and fight outside the store so that they wouldn't break everything. And my grandfather knows kung fu, so this is totally going to fit the stereotype of Chinese, or what at the
Wait,
time like Western
wait,
people
like
thought of Chinese people. Yeah, he
really
knows
actually
kung
knows
fu.
kung fu.
Yeah,
And what kind of kung fu?
white brow.
Nice. Yeah, is
Oh,
it just
really?
like
八美功夫
wow.
就是
Wow,
白美
that's awesome.
And so he decked a few of them, and in a group of kids, yeah,
Sounds like a
you're gonna,
movie.
a bit like Karate Kid, the Kung Fu Kid.
Could be an
Yeah.
episode of a
He
TV show.
he decked a few of them, and then the next day they came back. You only deck a few, and then the rest run away. And next day they came back and said, "Can you teach us?" right?
No way.
No,
Was
I'm
your grandfather
serious.
Bruce Lee?
No, he.
I'm pretty sure it's
I
like the
get.
same plot.
So when we were kids, yeah, he used to do this stuff with me, and he was good, man. Like he knew what he was doing, so he could totally deck you. Super fast, super fast. It was a kung fu which was designed, I think all martial arts in some way are designed like that, to get you on the floor as fast as possible and not waste so much energy. So there wasn't a lot of kicking. It was all like hand movements, but super fast. And he back at that time he'd been taught in Hong Kong. But yeah, just going back a little bit, so I don't go too much off topic. My mother, she tells me of times when she was in school and she would have to run to the storeroom to get a broomstick to protect herself, from
God.
getting beaten up by other girls. And I think, like Long Long, you've met my mum, I think
Yeah.
briefly.
Yeah.
And you definitely know a lot about my family. And then when you hear about that upbringing, you know why she is so tough. On the other side, she, a lot of Chinese going into the UK at the time come from Hong Kong, Kowloon side. So everybody that was doing well in Hong Kong, got the office job, generally stayed because they thought they had a good future. My mum and dad are from the villages. And so they didn't have anything to lose. So they flew over to the UK, not together. They met in the UK. And that was the kind of times they felt. I mean, my mother, she didn't, a bit like Jacqueline, actually. You found sneakers and your English level improved. My mother, she had something like 6 siblings. Everybody was helping in the store. So my grandma couldn't speak English. So my grandma, she remembers really clearly because she says it more than once. My mother must have been like way below the age of being legally allowed to work.
Yeah.
And she was just said, go to the counter and start serving people. And my mum's like, I can't speak. Yeah. And then she just, I don't care. You go there and you do it. Right. And so she did. And I just, that, and almost in that kind of way, it sums up my mum, how she is. Absolute ball breaker, takes no prisoners. In a way, tough love would, like, it's not that you can't show weakness to her, but if it's something that she totally feels like you're totally capable of, you're really going to know about it. Like, yeah.
I have
No
a
excuses.
question. So both you and Lung have like lived in the UK for, I mean, Lung, you went to college there, so 3-4 years, and then Dan grew up there. I lived in London for almost 3 months during a summer internship, and that's my only exposure of living in London for a relatively long period of time compared to traveling. And it was the time that I received the most number of racist comments and racist interactions. So I don't know if it's something that's like of the UK. I don't know. Like,
Well, this is actually something that James and I spoke about. We're actually going to touch upon it because
Okay.
we had a very interesting conversation about multiculturalism. Because I was talking to James, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, James. The UK has a very, very rich classist system that has been there for many years, right? And everybody talks about London. And actually, Jacqueline, London would have been the better place that you went to because it's deemed as relatively multicultural. There's many cultures down there. You go out of London, it's worse, right? And I'm just wondering because whether the history of the countries, whether James had that experience, what was his feeling of what was so-called multiculturalism at the time, and how that's changed and evolved in the US to what it is to modern day.
I think when I think about my own experiences, with racism, I would say that I have to sort of add the caveat that okay, I didn't experience like a lot of intense racism as a, through my life. I mean, this sometimes, but um, I think it's probably for me more like subtle things. Like, for example, when I was applying to college, I felt like I had to work harder than a white person to get into the same college because my parents always said, okay, well, if they have the choice between you and a white person who reminds them of their son or their daughter or their, nephew or something, they're going to pick the other person. So you got to be better. You have to be twice as good, three times as good to get the same thing. You have to work three times as hard to get the same thing. But I would say I didn't receive as much of that kind of like intense racism, but I think I have to have the perspective. I have the perspective now that as I've learned more about like Chinese people in this country, that I'm a relatively privileged person or a very privileged person, I would say, because my father came here for education. He had some family resources back in Taiwan. My grandfather was a doctor there. My mother had already started a business in Taiwan and had a little bit of money before she came to the United States. So we weren't in that kind of business where we're operating like, a takeaway or something like that, where, my father like works in an office. My mother, had her own business, she owned the office. So I wasn't exposed to the same kind of things, but a lot of that is just because in America, there's a big divide, I think, in the Asian community. Like when they look at Asians on average, they say, okay, Asians are wealthy, Asians have higher rates of home ownership, Asians have higher rates of college education. But in reality, in this country, Asians are very bifurcated. There's the people that are let in under the law, where they're come in for scientific or technical fields with special skills, like my father. And then there's people that come in, undocumented, who are like much more poor, don't have resources, don't speak the language, don't have as high educational level, and they're much more vulnerable to those kind of incidents that you're talking about than my family was. So when I say initially, like growing up, I thought, okay, America's not that racist, but I think some of that my perspective is influenced by my privilege. But as far as class goes, and multiculturalism, I think when I was a kid, America was seen, as a melting pot. That was always the analogy, and so everybody comes and they become like everyone's like treated the same. And also, you're taught in school, white people, black people, Chinese people, other people, everyone is the same. Everyone treated the same, and like, I think it sounds good, right? So nobody had a problem with it. I think in the last 10 years, or more, the concept of multiculturalism changed a bit. It's no longer that everyone is the same. Like when you're treating everybody the same, you're not recognizing their individual differences of where they come from, their individual histories. So if you say, okay, a black person is the same as a white person, well, you're not recognizing that a black person, their ancestors were subjected to slavery. They were subjected to systemic racism. Their grandparents were not allowed to, buy property in like a white neighborhood and let that property appreciate so they could have wealth. They may have not had access to a mortgage. They may have had their land taken from them or the resource taken from them. So they have a different, set of circumstances. And I think, everyone has a different set of circumstances. And I think recognizing that different groups have different circumstances is sort of the evolving multiculturalism of this country. Yeah. And with regards to Chinese people, like we do have our own set of circumstances that, a lot of Republicans, or, conservatives in this country, through like the Reagan era said that, okay, Chinese people or Asian people are the model minority. Okay, these people are not white. They come to this country. They do well. They have wealth. They buy houses. They have high educational levels. Okay, well, Black people, why can't you be like that? But then they're not recognizing, okay, they changed immigration to only allow people like this. So the people who come are educated. They have wealth. They're coming to get their PhD, and then you're like, oh, they have so many PhDs. Why can't you have PhDs? Well, you're letting in people who are coming to get PhDs. It's crazy. And so it's kind of like you created this thing, and then you use it to attack, another minority and pit us against each other, which is crazy. So initially, when I was a kid, I bought into this model minority thing. Okay, Asians work harder, we're smarter, whatever. But then I realized, okay, we have a totally different history. My dad came to get a master's degree. He didn't come in chains, to to work, and we weren't subjected to generations of systemic racism. So like it's a different circumstance, and I think that's where multiculturalism is headed, in this country.
Yeah, you I swear you must be one of the best talkers we've
I
had on the
know.
interviews on this. The way you articulate it, you're almost rivaling Jacqueline, not quite, but almost. But you touch on
Yeah.
a point about multiculturalism and how you grew up and stuff. But at that time, Chinese, probably not that many. You stated that fact. But how about with Black people? Because you mentioned about redlining, and how about even Hispanics? Um, could you go through more of what you saw at that time? And some people probably don't necessarily know what redlining was.
Yeah, so redlining is, I mean, I'm maybe not the best person to speak on this topic, but redlining is the practice of excluding Black people from neighborhoods, like white neighborhoods, so they sort of cluster in certain areas. The same thing happened with Chinese people back then. When we built the railroads and we came over, they didn't want to let us live in the white neighborhoods spread out everywhere. Like you can't own property over there. You're not allowed. You got to go live with the other Chinese people. And that's what a ghetto is. I mean, a ghetto was originally used to describe a Jewish area, and they were subject to the same thing in Europe back then too. So, that's the process by which I would say my experience with it is the story my mother told me, which was that when she first came to America, she was looking at homes with a realtor, and the realtor is just like, oh, what about this home? This seems like it's a nice house and it's not as expensive. And the realtor said, you don't want to live there. There's a lot of Black people there. And my mother said, what? Why? Like, what's the problem with Black people? And she said, they bring property values down. That was the realtor's explanation, the white realtor. Like it's so crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my mother's like, oh, and she just accepted that as a
Yeah.
fact, didn't think about it too much. But see, that's the kind of discrimination that they had. I mean, Donald Trump, not to get too political, but Donald Trump, his father was a big real estate guy, created big tracts of housing in Queens back then after World War II. And his father, was sued by the government over civil rights, because he wouldn't, if Black people applied to his one of his condos or one of his homes, he just throw the application out, put it in the drawer. It's marked like, Black or something, or like get some code for it. So that there was that kind of discrimination. And the thing about housing, I'm not sure how it is, in the UK or over in China, but housing in America, the government subsidizes housing in that when you buy a home, you take out a mortgage, and that loan, the interest on the loan is tax deductible, so that the actual real interest rate is extremely low. So the government is almost paying you to take a loan, because they know that you're forced to put money into the mortgage every month. And when you finish the mortgage 30 years from then and you're ready to retire, you sell your home, you have a big nest egg. And because the homes appreciate a lot over the years, you're forced to save. And it's built wealth in the white community. But Black people didn't have access to that wealth because, first of all, it's difficult to receive a mortgage. And second, they're put in areas where, they weren't allowed to live in white areas. They might be driven out. They wouldn't be shown the home or wouldn't be sold the home.
Yeah.
So that's what redlining is.
Yeah. Go, Lung. Go.
Two things. So if you're interested in this, I read this amazing book called Evicted, and it's all about this. But the thing I'm really curious about is that in the book, they're saying that to get a loan, right, especially Black people, they're going to look at your credit score. But these Black people can't even get a credit score because they can't even get a bank account and they can't get credit cards. So I'm not really sure. So they need someone to guarantee or sponsor you, but they can't get that. So it's just this cycle of like moving from this place, trying to make it work, and then getting evicted, and then moving around. And same thing, like you said, you can only go back to the same neighborhood, so you can't change this whole cycle. So your kids are getting bad education, and it just keeps going on and on and on. When I read that, I was like, okay, like how do you change this? Yeah.
What's really sick about that is that then the people who are racist come and say, okay, that's because you're lazy. That's because you're a lazy person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then it's like
exactly.
the system is against you. It's crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's very different to my experience because there isn't still a huge black community in the UK. Actually, Chinese were very, very a small minority, and most of it was Caucasian. And at the same time as uh, the borders were opening for Chinese to come in, a lot of Indian and Pakistani people took that opportunity to come into the UK in far greater numbers than Chinese. So I think when you know you're such a minority, Chinese people just, well, their original plan was to go there and try to make some money, and that remained their sole focus of doing that. They don't want to cause any trouble. I'm not saying that any other cultures want to cause trouble, but certainly you might not have the capacity to have a voice when there's so few of you, especially when you're completely dispersed. Also, um, England has such a long history of just being Caucasian, right? And not having any other culture. So now, when you have all this multiculturalism, it wasn't like that before. It was never migrant. You have British people, right? You have obviously you have Scottish people, you have Welsh people. And I can see their argument where they say, there's loads of people coming in now. And it's part of I'm touching on really the Brexit issue that happened a few years ago. The whole British culture is getting eroded. You've got people that are coming in, they can't speak the language. Does multiculturalism really work? Because if you go outside of London, what you find is pockets, and basically how you describe pockets of cultures, and they only get together on they don't really mix. If there's anything, it's mostly because they have to on a certain business or certain things like that. So it does really put a question mark on how successful it is. And also, did you consider how the British people think about all their traditions, all their culture now becoming less evident? Does anybody want to come in with anything to that, or any?
No, that was a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, that same kind of sentiment, has driven a lot of the, the conservative side in this country for the last 4 years. I would say, when you look at these studies, I'm not sure how long the immigrants have been coming in the UK, but, they tend to find that the first generation, is less assimilated. The second generation becomes much more assimilated, and it sort of occurs over time. I think in America, has a difference from the UK in that, slavery has existed in America since before America existed as a country. So, America, and then of course, America had the Civil War, we had the Civil Rights Movement. So in America, race relations have been very much defined by the interaction between, Black people and white people. Asians were kind of like an afterthought, I would say, except when they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1881 to just because we were the cheap labor, the immigrants that were taking over this country, at that time, in the post, Civil War era. And part of that was also because when they freed the slaves, they needed additional sources of cheap labor, and the Chinese, and other immigrant groups were that source of cheap labor. But in America, you have certain things like you have multiculturalism, even the kind that I had when I was a kid. We had the Civil Rights Act. You have these legal protections, and we have them because people fought for them. Like people marched for them. People died for these rights. Passed these bills in the 60s and 70s, and people continue to fight for it. So on one side, you have the racism, the systemic racism, which is very pervasive. But at the same time, you also have, on the other hand, you have people fighting against that racism, and they've always been both two sides of this thing, and it keeps evolving because there's this interaction between people who are racist and that's sort of status quo, and people who are trying to overcome the racism and coming together to fight it or change minds and change the way people think. So in America, you have this kind of like this kind of interaction, this continuous like change is something that prevents it from being like a really static society in terms of race, I think, which is different from the UK, it sounds like.
I mean, I think we've had a very interesting debate on multiculturalism and racism. I would like to move on because I think we could really just end up talking about that. Not that that's a bad thing, but moving on. I would like to ask, on a scale of like 1 to 10, and I usually ask this to people that are similar to me that were born somewhere, like are Chinese but born elsewhere and raised elsewhere. How Chinese would you say you are? Like 1 being the least and 10 being completely Chinese.
You like to grade people on this.
No, because it helps me know how to in somewhat connect with the person. You see, I can explain why. It's not that I like to put everybody in boxes, but certainly sometimes that helps to assimilate how I approach that relationship, because I know what might resonate with you. But it's a result of my teenage years where there were not many Chinese people around me. This is how I grew up. But I knew I was Chinese and I knew I was different. That was the key thing. But I didn't have anybody to attach to. I didn't have a group that I could attach to. And it happened in the teenage years because you kind of woke up to the fact that maybe things aren't equal in life. You know, maybe the opportunities weren't equal. And then you're constantly trying to find out why. Because for the last 10, 15 years, you've been taught equality. Equality exists. But in reality, it's a beautiful theory, beautiful concept, and it does exist in some parts, but it's definitely not across the board. And so I went through this identity crisis where I had to kind of refine myself. God, this last week, man, has been total like crisis for me, a crisis after crisis after crisis. But I think what really helped was the advent of the internet. So back then, there was ICQ, MSN Messenger, and I met a group of Chinese people that were based in the UK that used to go down to London a lot. So we used to meet down London. So through that, I found a core group and I realized I don't have to pick, right? I don't have to be white. I don't have to be Chinese, right? I actually have my own identity. Me saying it doesn't sound like it's that bad. Trust me, as a teenager, it was painful.
Yeah.
Like it was painful, really painful.
It's not like you don't have to pick. It's like other people pick it for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter if you're a teenager and you have the I guess maturity of a 50-year-old to a point where like in life you know that you don't need to satisfy how other people see you and you just live your own life. Even if you had that as a 16-year-old, the community that you're living in, people pick it for you. It doesn't matter how you identify. And that's I can understand that could be really stressful and toxic.
Yeah, because you didn't have anybody you could like. I can't talk to my parents about it because in their mind, they're Chinese. They'd never had the same experience as me, right? And they would also complain as like, oh, why'd you have to think like that? You know, that's a really white way of thinking. Well, don't blame me. You're the one that had me in this country, right? Like, you can't expect me to be. And that's the problem. Because if you go back to what I said, I would have thought I would have been maybe white. I don't know. But it's the fact that I wasn't treated equally that made me question mark it.
Yeah.
Right. But then when I went back to Hong Kong all the time and I was never really like, this is not my place either. So where do I belong in this world? Right. With nobody to talk to. So it was very difficult because we're going to talk about it with James now, is that in my family's very traditional Chinese. So they really, really try to imprint Chinese culture on me every year. At least once a year, they would take me back to Hong Kong for that side so that I wouldn't lose my Chinese culture. Obviously, they were doing their best in their mind of parenting me. But I think in your family, it was very much, oh, we are definitely staying here. You know, we're adopting, because you spoke mainly English at home and your Chinese isn't like totally fluent, is it?
No, not at all. I think if I was like I feel like if I went to Taiwan for like 2 weeks, I would be a lot more fluent, but I just have nobody to speak to, I guess. My parents always
Mm.
spoke to us in English when I was a kid. I would say I don't totally have the same feeling as you in terms of I always felt that in America there was some, the potential wasn't limited. It wasn't like you can't do certain things, but it's just harder. It was like there's like sand in the gears. It's like you just have to
Hmm.
work harder.
Mm,
You have to be better. You have to just work harder. And if you work hard enough, eventually you'll achieve it. But
mm,
it's just going to be a lot harder. That's all. Now I feel like yes, there are like I think leadership positions are more difficult to achieve. But I, th- I think yeah, I don't think I felt the same like strong limitations as you describe. As far as assimilation, when my parents came, they you have to understand also like my parents are in Taiwan. Excuse my bad Chinese. What Weisenland, they were my
Mm.
grandparents came from the mainland. They came in '49, with Chiang Kai-shek's army. Both my grandfathers were in that. One was a doctor and one was like an officer. So in Taiwan, they weren't part of the majority either. They already had undergone sort of the trauma of exile, once. Like actually, my father's name, which I didn't know until a couple of years ago, the name he was born with was Tyson. He was born in Taiwan. And then he changed it in college because he was born in 1949 and everyone was Tyson. Like the whole class was like Tyson. So he's like, all right, well, I can't be that. Nobody, if they call the name,
mm,
like
mm,
50 people stand up, like in the class. So he changed at that time. Because they didn't think that they would be there for the rest of their lives when they came, but that's what ended up happening. So they're even exiled once. They were a minority in Taiwan, and then okay, we're a minority again. But at least in America, you have stability. You
mm,
don't have to worry about the political future.
mm,
So I think once they came to America, my father got a green card,
mm.
became, legal residents and then citizens. I became a citizen when I was in second grade. I remember it was on Valentine's Day. I missed the Valentine's Day class thing and I went and swore an oath, I guess. I don't remember what I did
Mm,
exactly. My
mm,
parents had to take a test, like who's Abraham Lincoln? What did he do? He freed the
mm,
slaves. Okay.
mm,
Who's George Washington, first president, like that. Uh,
Mhm.
so, I guess they felt like, okay, once we're here, that's it. We made it. We're
mm,
gonna try to assimilate.
mm,
And at that time, America was number one. There was no
mm.
China wasn't
Yes.
rising back then.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Mhm.
I mean, actually, you mentioned something about names, right? So, my name is Daniel, obviously, Daniel Sum. And actually, it's one of those, my name's actually on my passport. So, it isn't something that, oh, we'll think of an English name and we'll add it on and we'll call him that, right?
Mm.
And they thought about it because they thought
Mm.
if we just give him the Chinese name, he's going to get bullied the shit out of, right? Because that's what we
Mm.
experienced. So, they gave me the Chinese name. So, actually,
Mhm.
Daniel is my middle name, which I use day
Oh.
to day. But you know, back at school, private school, I was called Chop Suey, right? That was my nickname. Yeah, Chop Suey. And then, unfortunately, it was that time as well where you had the Karate Kid, and he's called Daniel Sun or Daniel San. Everybody
oh
thought it was Daniel
shit!
Sun, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, but like in Japanese, they say Daniel San, right? And then my name is Daniel
Yeah,
Sum,
some.
right? So I used to get that constantly where people would say, oh, your name followed by, Daniel-san. Yeah, that kind of crap, right?
Mm.
And you know what? You would never get away with that now. And also, I had to smile and laugh with that, you know,
Mm.
and actually take that in. Like, that's bullshit. So that's kind of like the era, or I guess how modern society has now changed, has moved on, which maybe for the better, definitely for the better.
Mm.
But yeah, at the time, you don't think that it's not right. You
Mhm.
just accept it, right? So it just reminded me when you said about Tyson, because probably if you were in the UK and you got Tyson and the era of Mike Tyson, you probably get that, you know,
Yeah.
right? So that's the kind of maybe you didn't get that kind of treatment. And I certainly got into some fights at high school when I just couldn't, take it anymore. Like they said a few things, and you can always let one or two pass. But when let's say you're playing a game of sport and it's constant, right? It's constant because it's competitive, right? And in the end, you just lose it because you're full of adrenaline as well. But I tell you, right, you lose it, there's no backup for you. People either sit on the sidelines and don't do anything, or the other guy gets some help. So, and then nothing's really sorted out anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I think circling back to your question about whether how Chinese I am, I would say it's difficult to say. Like my identity is, I think, difficult to define on like a scale like that easily. Like when I was a kid, people would talk about, okay, someone is an ABC or an FOB, like they're fresh off the boat or they're American born Chinese. Like that was like two things. There's Twinkie or banana, whatever, white on the inside, or like, you're just so Chinese or whatever. I grew up mostly with white people. I did assimilate. My wife is white. My kids are mixed. So I would say that there's certain things about me. I think I have a lot of cultural affinity for Chinese culture. I think my like ethical, moral, code is very much based in what I think of as like Asian values, not in like Western values, not in religion, per se, but more like, roles or relationships, like a sort of a Confucian way. But on the other hand, I don't speak Chinese very well. I feel awkward, when I speak it. I don't read Chinese. So like, when I search out media or books, I tend to gravitate towards Chinese subjects, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of distance. Like there's a feeling maybe of like feeling of being like in exile. Like you said, like you're not really comfortable in either location. You're not,
this is actually
one thing or the other.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think as I'm, I turned 40 last year, and I think at this point in my life with, I'm married and I have, two small kids, I do feel like integrated as a person. I feel like I have my values, my goals, I understand myself. But it's not like so easily defined. It's not like I can say that, okay, I'm so culturally Chinese, or like so culturally American. I do have like certain things that I feel very American about, like patriotic or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, I don't feel like, I do have things that are very Asian too. I think it's particularly with respect to ethics.
Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from. Because of my experience, it's really great that I think all three of you, to some extent, right, know where your home is, maybe, right? You really identify. But for me, I don't really have a home. I don't feel like I do. Not that I feel that's a problem. I always tend to think that I see places quite objectively rather than having that emotional attachment to a place. So if that place benefits me, then great. I don't get that blindness you might have with an emotional attachment with a place. But I will say the closest place I've ever felt welcomed is China. Because, and I really thought about this, because Hong Kong and the UK are islands. They have a very small island mentality. The population isn't particularly big compared to China or the US. And so that identity is very strong. Their own culture is very strong in those countries. But in China, yes, they have a very strong national pride and they identify as Chinese. But it's so big with so many provinces that every province has their own subculture. So obviously Jacqueline, we make fun of her, and she's from Dongbei, and we say she likes drinking baijiu. If you say like Wenzhou Ren, you say like they kind of got this stereotype of being the Chinese Jews because they're so great at doing business. and then you've got like Guangdong, which is just like food, and then you've got Shanghai, where everybody thinks like 很小气, like very tight. Yeah. So you have all these subcultures, but everybody identifies as Chinese. So when they saw me, they said, "Oh, you're Chinese. You're just from England," because England is like a province in China. So they still accept you. So it also, I felt Chinese 很包容性很强. So their ability to accept, receive, be very generous was very, very strong, because I think for all those cultures to get on, they had to find a way of getting on with each other. So yeah, but we're going to finish this interview with the last question, which is, are you interested in finding more about your culture? And if so, how would you go about doing that? And you mentioned your 2 kids. How much of Chinese culture do you want them to know? But before you answer that question, I think Long Long has a question.
I actually don't have a question. I just want to add, right? This is just my general observation. I feel like countries which are really big and don't lack this, especially with land, a few things. So I'm in Singapore right now, and literally like last night, every single time I go out, I have to re-explain this whole story. The first thing they say to me is, "Why do you speak like that?" Then I have to go through this whole, "Oh, I went to international school, da 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 da." So I don't feel like this is my home, right? Go back to Taiwan. I don't, even though like I think when you guys hear me speak, you're like, okay, you're Taiwanese, right? But my Mandarin isn't so fluent that they're like, this is your mother tongue. So they'll be like, "Oh,
it's like my Cantonese.
Like ABC, blah 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 blah." So then I have to explain that. So you're right. Like when I go to China, nobody questions me. And then so even when you say to me like, where do you feel like home is? It's like Singapore, not really. Even though physically you feel like there is a home and you feel really comfortable.
Yeah.
And same with Taiwan. Family is there. You feel like, okay, I'm home.
Yeah.
But you're like, okay, I still feel like a tourist. And generally, like everyone, I wouldn't say they're super welcoming. It's only in China where I'm like, I could live here, like that kind of feeling. Like they actually welcome you and they want you to live here. That's the main thing. They want you to live here. They want to make you feel comfortable. They want to give you resources to say, "Hey, let me teach you about my culture. Stay here."
Yeah, totally. I think you said it. You said it. That's exactly how I feel. When you said also about having the big house here, big house there. Yeah. I've totally feel exactly like you. Well put.
Same.
And I think people that live in smaller countries, so like Taiwan, Singapore. Okay, maybe not so much Taiwan, but Singapore and Hong Kong, right?
Yeah, it's bad.
I think I feel like they feel threatened. And it's not that I am somebody that is exceptional or whatever, right? It's just that they feel threatened because they don't understand you. So me being Taiwanese, being in Singapore, the first reaction, instead of being like, "Oh, you're half Taiwanese," in their mind, that the first thing they say to me, which I get a lot, is, "Where do you work?" As in KTV, disco, call girl. Those are my top professions that I get. It's just like there's no way you can be Taiwanese and have a normal job in Singapore.
Well, I mean, when you talk about that, like you mentioned having a small country like Hong Kong, and you mentioned Singapore, right? Very small population. Even I think it's slightly different. Well, I can't say for Singapore, but in Hong Kong, you have the local, even then in that culture of 7 million people, you have the local Hong Kongers and you have people like me and you. And the reason why you have people like you and me, because you realize how many Chinese people flew out of Hong Kong or Guangdong, and then they went back into Hong Kong because of the opportunities, and you kind of could straddle. And with the Hong Kong being a colony, with that British history as well, made it easy for people like me and you. And so at the same time, people like me and you took the great jobs, right? Took the better jobs. So the locals kind of had that, oh God, they're different. They're not real true Hong Kongers. So
Mhm.
yeah, but sorry, we've totally
Yeah.
taken your question. Please go ahead, James.
Oh, I was just going to comment. I guess I've never lived in China, so I couldn't tell you, but I do have a strong identity, regional identity. It gets stronger as I get older, which is being from New York. Like when I was younger, I thought maybe I could live in California because it's also another big state. There's relatively large numbers of Asian people there, and it's got its own identity and stuff. But now I meet someone from California, I'm like, it's so California, like. But when I lived in Philly, I was like, all right, well, it's an East Coast city. It's kind of scrappy. It's kind of like New York. It's going to be just like New York. I went to Philly. I'm like, this is nothing like New York. Not at all. They have their own accent, actually, which is pretty hilarious, which nobody ever does in any television show correctly because it's a weird accent. If you heard the accent, you wouldn't recognize that it's an accent, actually.
Right.
But anyway, so circling back to the question, as far as Chinese identity, I think it's challenging. I think I'm limited by my lack of fluency in Mandarin because when I talk to people, it's kind of like Long, like you were saying, okay, you have an accent. You're like, oh, you're not really Chinese, right? I just get judged by Chinese people, like not by the way I look, but the way I talk. Like, you're not really. Oh, you're an ABC. I only talk to you in English, so you understand. I'm like, thank you, because I do understand better in English, but I'm not totally accepted, so it's hard for me to find people like that. I have been trying to like circle more to my Chinese identity recently. I think the internet makes it easier. So like on Facebook, there's that group Subtle Asian Traits that I used joined a couple of years ago.
That's such a good group.
Yeah, it's like Asian culture. You like hear about stuff like I know nothing about like K-dramas. Like I found out through there.
Yeah.
And like podcasts, like this Uncle Roger guy. They have a podcast called Bryce to Meet You. Like have you heard that before? It's like a comedy podcast.
Oh yeah,
nice title though.
Yeah, he has Evelyn Mock as the co-host. So I think the internet I've been trying to get like a little bit more. It's hard for me because I don't speak Mandarin fluently. I'm like, I can't totally get into it. I can't totally touch. It's like just out of reach all the time. I can't read either, so I can't. Yeah. But I read always in translation. Like I forget which writer. I think Joseph Conrad. He had to read his own language in translate, or some writer had to read his own language in translation or something. So there's always that distance, but at least the internet brings the world a little bit closer. As far as transmitting culture to my kids goes, I would say, that's important. It's made me want to connect with my culture more. And I think also, my wife is Jewish, and I feel like, at least in my wife's case, in the Jewish community, there's a lot of resources for transferring your culture to the next generation. Jewish people have always been a people in exile, for thousands of years, right, before Israel was founded. And, even now. So they have a way to transmit the culture, which is they have resources. For example, there's a thing called PJ Library. This is a service where you sign up. If you're Jewish, you just get it. It's free. You get a children's book about Jewish culture every month, like regularly, from the time your kid is born. If you sign up for it, it's free. And then every month you're reading them. And so you have the book in your house, so you're going to read it. And it's got stories about Jewish holidays, Jewish culture, and stuff like that. So that's like a really powerful way to pass your culture down, right? Also, the religion itself, there's like a naming ceremony, there's a bar mitzvah. They have different ways to pass the culture down, that are very organized. And so when I saw that, I saw my kids acquiring the Jewish culture so much. My older daughter is 6, and my younger son is too small for it. He's a year and a half. But I saw my daughter getting so much of the Jewish culture. I felt like, okay, well, I have to transfer my culture, right? Not that it's competitive, but it's kind of like I don't want her to lose it. And she's already half Chinese, and I wasn't sure if she really identified as being Chinese at all, actually. So actually, when she's with my wife, like a lot of times they say like, oh, your daughter, in Philadelphia, this happened more because it's more conservative, I guess, different from New York's more cosmopolitan. People come from different places, but in Philadelphia, people are like, oh, your daughter, she looks exotic. I was like, what does that mean, exotic? They're trying to ask, is she half
Yeah.
Mexican, half Asian? What's her deal?
Oh
You know,
my God.
what's your husband? But that's what they meant. But
Yeah.
they found a very Philadelphia way to express. Sorry, Philadelphia. I love you guys. You voted right in the election, so I can't bash on you too much. But so I felt like I need to try to do something. So I've been trying, but I have to say, compared to Jewish stuff, like the cult, like trying to find stuff in translation is sparse. Like trying to find children's books, even on Amazon, about Chinese culture, and some of the ones you find are like weird or they don't really apply. I guess Chinese culture is also not a monolith, so I'm trying to find things. Maybe I would then find more if the thing came from like Taiwan or something, but at the same time, it's like it's more challenging. But recently, I started a thing where now that everybody knows how to do Zoom, my mother has Chinese lessons, Mandarin lessons with my daughter every Sunday. So it's like a one-on-one interaction. My daughter has a brother now, so she's needs attention, and it's virtual. So she does these lessons. She teaches her a few words, but mostly it's like interaction and hanging out. And so she's kind of passing the culture. And I like to do Asian things with her, like eat Chinese food, go to a good Chinese restaurant, like a real Chinese restaurant, with not with like authentic food but sometimes it sort of spreads out to be pan-Asianness. It's not always in America. It's not always like just Chinese. It's like I started watching K-dramas with my wife. I know that's Koreans, but it's like okay, we're in America, we're kind of on the same side. And then there's a lot of Japanese grocery stores in my area. I don't know why exactly, but I go to them all the time. I bring my daughter there and we eat like Japanese fried chicken. That's like our thing. There's like Japanese huge one with a food court in New Jersey where we get like soft serve green tea ice cream. It's like you're looking for Asian stuff, and food is like an easy way, I guess, to do it that doesn't necessarily involve speaking the language.
I have a question. So one thing that I noticed after going to school and living in the States is I always thought, growing up in both China and Vancouver has a lot of Chinese population, like big Chinese population.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. And the people around me, Chinese people, are either like kids fluent in Chinese, so maybe like they were born in China and moved here, or not so fluent, so like grew up in Vancouver. And then when I moved to the States, and I met so many people, my classmates, they were born in the States, but they're fluent in Mandarin, and you can't even really tell that they're an ABC. So I was just wondering, like, in your case, James, like you were born basically like in the States. You moved there when you were 1 year old, and you said that your parents spoke to you in English primarily, and now that your parents, your mom is trying to teach your daughter Chinese. When you were growing up, was there ever like something coming from the parents saying like, hey, you should learn Mandarin, or you should speak more fluently, or was there no pressure at all and you were just like not really in a bilingual setting, and it was just like primarily English?
I think the difference between you and I is that we have a significant age difference. So nowadays people want to speak Chinese. White people want to learn to speak Chinese because there's business opportunities. There's, a lot of potential there. When I was a kid, I think my parents were more afraid of that I would have an accent. And I know this is something that's been disproven now, like bilingual kids can speak both languages perfectly. But I think at that time they were afraid that if they spoke to me in Chinese that I somehow wouldn't learn English, I wouldn't speak it well, I would have an accent, I would be picked on, I wouldn't be accepted in American society, white society. So they actually went out of their way to try to speak to me in English because they thought like, okay, he's going to learn English, speak English, become American, become assimilated. Like that was their goal. It's not, and that's very different. I think in terms of learning theory and also the relative position of China and the US is very different today. The other aspect of it is that, yes, there were ways at that time to learn Chinese, like there were certain cultural things, like the two main things were Chinese school was one, where you go and like they teach you Chinese and teach you how to read and write. I hated Chinese school. I couldn't stand it. It was very difficult. I felt awkward, and I just hated it so much. And eventually, I quit after a couple
Yeah.
of years, and they let me quit without too much of a fight,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, for
Yeah.
Chinese parents. But then the other part is like cram school, as we call it. Like I guess in Taiwan they call it bushiban, right?
Mhm.
It so that I went to that more because it had like a purpose. Like it was to be, improve your scores, like your SAT
Yeah.
score, standardized test scores, and try to get into a good college. So I went
Yeah.
to that for many years. I went to that much more, and at that time didn't really have it in Long Island where I live. So it was in Flushing, which is like the big Chinatown, New York. So
Yeah.
so I did go to that. Actually, I remember when I was in like middle school, maybe early years of high school, my brother started going as well to like the kids version, and he said the only thing he learned there was how to play Pokemon with the other kids on Game Boy.
And he wouldn't be wrong.
I remember the first thing they showed us was that they had a bulletin board and they said, okay, they wrote down 12 schools names and it said, this is Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell, UPenn. These are the Ivy League. These are the best schools in America. This is your goal. Okay. We'll give you a prize if you get one of these.
That's so funny.
So yeah, I went to it. A lot of kids there lived in Flushing. So it was like a little bit, I was like kind of like a privileged kid, I guess, in the cram school. So
I know. Go
anyway,
ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, because, I had that. Like, we go back when I say had that, I mean, going to Chinese school, right? And the fact that your parents worried that if they spoke to you in Chinese, you might develop an accent. See, the mentality of my parents, and it's just so interesting because it's interesting how parents think of what's the best way to parent my child and then their philosophy. He said, you're in England. I don't worry that you won't learn English. I worry that you won't learn Chinese, right? Because your exposure to Chinese is hardly anything. It's only in this house. So we had this rule, which is completely different to yours. We could only speak Chinese at home. So as in, it was a rule. If we spoke to our parents, we had to speak Chinese. And my father was so on it that, can you remember VHS cassettes that I used to put in and then you watch TV? He would ask his friends in Hong Kong to send me the Chinese cartoons to watch and pick up the language, because that was just like my only exposure. I used to think, because most of those are actually Japanese and then dubbed into Cantonese. I actually thought, wow, these cartoons were way better than like the ones in like that England are producing. And then, when I got to 14, 15, all that time I had been learning, going into Chinese school. But, my father, every other day after school, after I finished my homework, it was Chinese, right? I used to hate it. Everybody like, what? And nobody else is doing this. I have to do it. And, I got my GCSE, which is one of the national examinations in that language. So I got that. And then after that, when I thought, okay, this is done, I'm going to have more free time. Yeah. My father said, right, you're going to learn Mandarin now. Right. And I was like, what? Even I was like, what? And all his friends, all his Chinese friends were like, not just what? They were like, you idiot. Like, China is like third world. Why are you even bothering? Like, why would you even want to be associated with that? So I was the only one that learned Mandarin, right? And now, I look back and I see the wisdom, and I think, fuck, man. I so thank you for that. I so thank you for that, because you gave me the opportunity to come to China, right? To potentially do business. You actually widened my job opportunity by just doing that. And certainly the friends I have in this room, if it wasn't because of that, I don't think I would have made these friends. Right. So
I have a question.
yeah, go for
I'm
it.
quite curious about this. So James, I'm also Weissman, right? So my grandparents came from China. And so when I used to have a tutor that would come to my house to teach me Mandarin, and I found it super interesting that my parents chose people with Chinese accents. So people listening, like Taiwanese accent, I always compare it like Taiwanese accent is like American English, and then
Mm,
Chinese Mandarin
mm,
is like British
mm,
English, right?
mm, mm.
Um, and I remember asking them like, why are we like, why do I have to learn this kind of accent when we speak so differently at home, right? And they kept saying, no, you got to learn it. And then back when I was a kid, that was when there was an influx of Chinese people coming into Singapore, but they were doing, they were heavily associated with KTVs, cleaning jobs, so lower end jobs, right? So people hated mainland Chinese people. So I never understood that. So my question is, when you went to those Ban, right? What accent were they using? Like, where were the teachers from?
Um, to be honest with you, I don't know. Like the Chinese school, I
Yeah.
went when I was so young. I don't remember. I think honestly, I think most of those places are run by people from Taiwan. But what I've heard, later on. But I can't remember. I don't know.
Yeah.
As far as the cram school goes, the classes were in English because they were teaching you like standardized testing strategies and math and stuff like that. The accent, I guess I wasn't sophisticated enough at that time to really discern.
My teacher was from Beijing, so it's so typical of my dad. I'm going to pick Beijing, right? So I had the Beijing. So when I speak, sometimes I have that yin, right? That how they roll the tongue.
Yeah.
And then like suddenly it just comes out, and it's so because it's not consistently there, right?
Yeah.
It just comes out like what?
I think it's so interesting that Long you said that because I grew up in Dongbei, and people who know Dongbei, there's like a Dongbei accent, which it's like a dialect, and not dialect, just like an accent, just like a very strong way of saying things and a lot of passion and a lot of emphasis. But I was growing up like my parents spoke 普通话, but my grandparents had this really strong Dongbei accent. And now that I'm older and I've lived in North America for more than half of my life, every time I go back to China, people would always comment on like, "Oh, you're from Dongbei, but your 普通话 is really good." And then I would always be so confused. I was like, "What do you mean? Like everyone in Dongbei speak 普通话." And they're like, no, Dongbei 人 speak in a different way. And I always like refused it until every time I call my grandparents, and it's so obvious that the accent is very different. So, and then I realized like every time I'm speaking with older people from the Dongbei region, I also like speak in a Dongbei accent and I start picking it up. So it's just so interesting how like your background and where you grew up can define it's like subconscious, it's all subconscious.
It's hugely different.
How you approach people, it's everything. Like language isn't just language. It's how you think, it's how you connect to people, it's how you make friends. So
So even Guangdonghua, you have the Hong Kong Guangdonghua, right? And then you have like Guangdong Guangdonghua. And then even where my parents are from originally, they're from Shunde, Sundap, right? Sundap. And then it's like that Guangdonghua is 不一样哦. It's not the same, like at all. It's like it almost sounds like they're singing, right? But we're going to round this up now because you have something final to say, James? You finish then.
Well, all four of my grandparents were from different provinces. They met like during the war, like moving from place to place. So already there was some kind of like dislocation there, I would say. Like my maternal grandfather was from Guangdong. He was Caozhou, so he spoke Caozhou and Cantonese and learned Mandarin. And then my grandmother's on that side is Hunanese, and then my grandfather on my father's side was from Anhui, and then his wife was from Henan.
Mm.
So they're already from like 4 different areas.
Yeah.
And they met in Taiwan, and and then people in Taiwan speak Taiwanese, right? So I don't think they spoke that much Taiwanese because they weren't that assimilated. But my mother's younger siblings, especially the youngest of the 5 kids on my mother's side, my uncle David, he speaks he speaks Taiwanese extremely fluently and mixes his Taiwanese into his Mandarin. So it's like sometimes it's hard to understand him because his wife is Taiwanese. He like assimilated into Taiwan. You know what I mean?
I think it's important to put some context in the fact that what James just said, Hernanese and Hunanese and Anhui, all these places, right? They speak a different language, man. Like it's not like we go there and then okay, I understand what you're saying. It's completely different. So Anhui, just give you a is not that far from Shanghai, right? And yet Shanghainese will not know what they are saying. And Anhui will not know what Shanghai people are saying. It's totally different. So I think it's important to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they got along with each other, to be honest with you.
普通话 and food, probably.
Yeah.
But we're going to round this up. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Very stimulating one, this episode. And I hope that people that have thought about these things, or because there is a younger audience out there, I think we all go through it, especially how global the world is. And I hope it resonated with you and helped you. So we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, James, again. Thank you, Lang Long. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List podcast.